chapter, or better said, the first chapter of Harveste Addams and the Sorcerer's Stone. I really hope you will enjoy this as much as I did. I will have to give a content warning due to the Addams typical violence, maybe some cursing, some quite twisted views on things that aren't normally accepted by society. And of course, the little death that never, and I mean never, what would you say, caused any issues. Then there will be cross-dressing for our friends, there will be Adam's family sadism. I hope you like this little twisted thing. And let us get started with Kyaru-Chan's Harveste Addams and the Sorcerer's Stone. Chapter 1. There was a large puff of smoke on platform 9 3/4. It smelled like lavender with a hint of locker room socks. Bless me, I haven't done that in a while. Cool, let's do it again. On the way back, darling, I'll let you hold the foot. The smoke cleared, and the word Bulstrode blinked in disbelief. It couldn't be. It couldn't be that family. But there was no way it wasn't. No one normal looked like they did. There was a woman holding a mustachioed baby, her face shaded by a veil and further shadowed by a black lace umbrella, standing stoically in the midst of the motley crew that surrounded her. It included a madly grinning man puffing on a monster of a cigar, a giant that wouldn't have looked out of place in a morgue, a wizened old crone that put storybook witches to shame, a muscled strawberry blonde with what looked like a crossbow, a young woman with her face hidden behind her fringe and Chinese fan, and a little girl with a beheaded doll. And a hand that didn't look like it belonged to anybody. There was a hand all by itself, tapping its fingers idly and looking as bored as a dismembered body part could. There was also luggage, as if someone from that family was going to Hogwarts. Oh no. Who are they, father? Hush, Millicent, he hissed, his mind unfurling in cold horror. It could be not them. Sabini dabbed at her eyes as she watched her son push his luggage onto the train. Don't cry, mother. It's just until the holidays. I'm sorry, sweetheart. I just... She smiled tearfully at him. Who's going to help me hide the bodies now? Technically, I shouldn't know about those things. Yes, yes. Cyrena sniffed, waving her handkerchief. But I shall miss you so, my dear. I'll have a new husband by the time you get back, don't worry. An unplanned romance, I'm sure. Blaze smirked sardonically. Something made his nose twitch and he looked around curiously. What is that smell? His mother fluttered her eyelashes as she looked around. What are you... Oh my God! What's the matter? Blaze blinked as the piteous look on his mother's face was replaced with something close to giddy awe. Do you know those people? Those are atoms, she said breathlessly, yellow-tinted eyes wide. Oh, Blaze, darling, the stories. They haven't been seen on the Isles for over 180 years, but I know them anywhere. What on earth are you talking about, Mother? Who are the Addams? Oh, my darling, you'll soon find out. You're so lucky. Lucius Malfoy, old man. What? Lucius Malfoy was not a man given to surprise, but when a strange man gripped his hand with the strength of a stampeding bull, he supposed that he could be surprised just this once. Go, Miss Addams, we've met a few years ago, June I think it was, in Oregon. There was an explosion. Ah, yes. How could he forget? The carnage had been dreadful. Harry pinched the bridge of his nose and sighed. The trip, the sound of happy children, and all the damnable sunlight were getting to him. Grandma, you've outdone yourself. I think your transatlantic potion has got me a little woozy. Twack, twack, thunk. I think just keep on missing every single time. It's enough to make me hang myself. What? Honestly, you two, I said woozy, not slow. Harry looked down at his sister. She looked like a little Morticia, her arms crossed over her chest, mutinously glaring at the ground. Wednesday, are you still angry at me? You're leaving, she hissed between her teeth, and I'm going to be all alone with no one to kill. You've got Pubert. He doesn't run fast enough. My valuable Kyrie, he said with a smile, picking her up so he could kiss her nose. At 9 years old, she was still petite enough to hide in the smallest of crevices like a trapdoor spider waiting for its unsuspecting prey. I'll be home for winter solstice, and I'll help you prepare your first mass sacrifice. How's that? So your children are going to Hogwarts this year, Lucius was saying. Not just one. Harvest, come say hello to Mr. Malfoy. Harry looked up and walked over, still whispering macabre ideas into his sister's ear. His dark eyes grew wider and wider with glee. Her eyes grew wider and wider with glee. He ended it with a little kiss on her marble cheek before smiling his best Addams smile at the imposing blonde in front of him. It's nice to meet you, Mr. Malfoy. The tall aristocrat inclined his head perfunctorily, then reached behind him to pull out what looked like an exact, if smaller, version of himself to the fore. This is my son, Draco. Slytherin, naturally. All our family has been Slytherin. Is that so? Gummis said cheerfully, his eyes sparkling. That's where all those Death Eaters came from, yes? I read all about it. Vicious killing machines, the lot of them dealing out torture after heinous torture, leaving broken bones and rotting flesh behind on blood-soaked grass. Absolutely demented! Harry smiled wider, hiding it behind Wednesday's braided hair. Oh, father, don't tease. Harvest looked out at the overcast sky, pine trees and fields zooming past at a stomach-churning rate. He felt like that sky full of a burgeoning feeling that weighed down on his heart. His mother had warned him that other people were not as open to mindless violence as their family was, and he had to exercise special care with his weapons so as not to hit anything crucial. Where was the fun in that? Although Mother had mentioned weapons, but nothing about the use of potions. Presumably magic in the United Kingdom was advanced enough to deal with at least that. And explosions. She hadn't said anything about explosions. A corner of his mouth tilted upwards as he recrossed his legs, the soft cotton of his skirt tightening over his skin. There was a searing tingle, and he licked his lips reflexively. Acromantula blood and tree frog poison. He must have gotten it when he kissed Marie Antoinette, Wednesday's doll, goodbye. The little minx. He was sitting in a train compartment with 4 other people. There had been other people in it before, older years from the looks of them, but they had mysteriously scampered out when he had smiled. Draco Malfoy sat opposite him, flicking through his potions book. The other two, a Vincent Crabbe and Gregory Goyle, hunched over their food. Harry felt a pang of homesickness. They ate like Uncle Fester did, disgustingly and with no grasp of table manners at all. As for the last one, "So, you're an Addams?" Blaise Sabini peered at the young lady beside him. A crossed, silk-lined fan was tapping a slow rhythm on her blood-red lips, her enigmatic eyes strangely shadowed. She was a little darker than the rest of her family, but not quite tanned. Blaise remembered just how pale the tall, vampiric-looking woman had been. Not just pasty, but literally chalk white. Anyone would have looked tanned next to her. "I am." The curl of her lips was inscrutable, bordering on necromantic. A shiver of fear slid down his spine, and he cleared his throat self-consciously. That was no way for a Sabini to act. My mother was pleased to see your family. But I have never heard of any Addams. You don't sound like you're from here. Are you purebloods?" "We live in America." She smiled again. "And we practice dark magic too, if that's what you mean. But mostly we use the old magic." "What do you mean by old?" This was Draco now, grey eyes shifting like quicksilver under the light. "The old spells?" "Yes." She turned the same smile on the blonde, who to his credit did not shrink back, though Blaise noticed how his hands tightened on his book. "And the magic before the division of the Arthurian Wars." "Oh." Blaise watched the blonde's eyes flicker down briefly before glancing upwards again. "Merlin was responsible for the distinction between light and dark, wasn't he? Well, and Lady Le Fay." "That's true. I'm talking about base magic, the type used before their time. Blood magic." Her smile didn't waver an inch, though it did grow more gruesome. "It wiped out the dinosaurs, and started the Black Plague." Blaise couldn't believe his ears as she kept on talking, her words capturing a horrified yet fascinated Draco. It was the same type of magic his mother practiced, and some of the older families as well, but they didn't talk about it. She was talking about blood magic, something darker than dark, tinged with shame and guilt and horrible consequences. Serena Sabini did it out of necessity, or so she had reassured him after every funeral. It was the only way she could survive as a Black Widow. But to mention it so nonchalantly, as if the world didn't look down on it, and to speak of it with such relish. Harveste Addams took creepy to a whole other level. Harveste Addams was an enigma, Draco decided as he looked at the dark head a few paces away from him. His father had taken him aside when the eccentric family had moved on. He had noticed the luggage following obediently behind them, like a pack of the queerest dogs he had ever seen. But he hadn't mentioned anything, just in case it was a spell he hadn't studied yet. "Draco," his father had said, his voice low and his eyes haunted. "Draco, you must make friends with this Addams girl, no matter what happens, no matter what house she's sorted into. Do you understand?" "Even if she gets into Gryffindor?" The taste of the accursed word had been heavy on his tongue. His father had laughed. It had a strangled bark. Well, if a strangled bark could be called a laugh, there is no way in the 9 hells that girl will be placed in Gryffindor. Dumbledore may be a lot of things, but he would be absolutely deranged if he even considered it. You must make friends with her. Promise me that, Draco, and stay close to her. Why, father? Just trust me. Trust me. His father had never said that before. Even his mother had looked afraid, and he knew she had been fearless enough to not take the Dark Mark, not even when the Dark Lord had been at full power. And then there had been that talk on the train about blood magic. Her green eyes had been alight as if she had been talking about her favorite subject and not the most gruesome and forbidden branch of magic arts. Addams, Harveste! There was a whisper growing louder with every step as she sort of drifted towards the front of the great hall. He had not noticed that about her, the way she moved like fog, like her feet weren't even touching the ground. It was probably the dress. The whispering came from the teachers' tables as well, surprisingly from one dark-haired, hook-nosed professor who was also his godfather. Draco wondered what he was so agitated about. "An Addams? In this school, Dumbledore? Are you mad?" She wasn't that bad. Or maybe she was, because when she reached the podium where the sorting hat was, all she did was stroke a finger over the brim, and it began to scream. It was the sort of scream that no mortal could make, but banshees could come close if they had their wings ripped off. It reached the rafters high and tortured and so full of heart-wrenching pain, and it just went on and on and on until Harveste decided to lift her hand. She smiled. Slytherin. The hat panted in a strangled and shaking voice as it shrank away from her. Slytherin. Parkinsons had been the queens of Slytherin ever since Hogwarts had started. Her ancestor, Virel Parkinson, had been the first and the best. Pansy had heard that she had been worse than Grindelwald and more bloodthirsty than the Dark Lord. She had been looking forward to her chance for years, ever since her mother had told her there was no way she was going to dishonor the Parkinson blood by allowing some American upstart to take her place. Pansy glared at the new girl who was lounging on one of the couches in the common room. There was a space around her, and the couch was otherwise unoccupied, though the rest of the other chairs were filled, as if people didn't want to go near her. It was as if they were frightened. A bunch of idiots, she thought to herself, just because the sorting hat had to be taken away a few minutes before the sorting was continued. Well, she wasn't scared. I'm going to talk to her. You don't want to do that, Pansy. Millicent, her childhood friend, hissed. My dad told me about them. Don't be stupid. She can't be worse than anyone else in this room. She ignored the collective gasp as she marched up to the girl and sat down next to her. She extended her hand, though the look in her eyes was sharp. I'm Pansy Parkinson. From under the dark fringe, emeralds glinted with something, and then a smile was tilted at her. Harveste Addams, nice to meet you. Her touch was freezing, as if she had never felt the sun. Her skin felt so slightly scaly. It was all Pansy could do not to recoil. Benjamin Urquhart broke the silence with a cough. Bed, everyone, your classes start tomorrow. Indeed. The girl smiled again, and Pansy felt her heart thudding away a mile a minute. Well then, Miss Parkinson. She recoiled from the seat like a cobra from the grass, and started for the boys' dormitory. Pansy resisted the urge to wipe her hand on her skirt. Millicent patted her shoulder. The look on her face said, "I told you so." "Where are you going, Miss Addams? The girls' rooms are on the other side." Her laugh was like the peal of a church bell at midnight, the sort that was only used during funerals or times of imminent disaster. Everyone shuddered. First class was potions with the Gryffindors. There was another circle around her. Him, the rest of the class stuck to the shadows. 5 people to a table. Though there was only enough space on each bench for 3. It was probably the first time Slytherins had shown such open trepidation. Severus Snape pinched the bridge of his nose. Typical. Even his traditional start of the year speech lacked its fires. The Gryffindors didn't even look intimidated. They were all, down to the very last one, looking at the demurely smiling brunette, dressed in impeccable green and silver. He was wearing the girls' uniform, naturally. Even Dumbledore hadn't said anything, but his usual sparkle had noticeably dimmed at breakfast. This would not do. "Mr. Addams, our newest celebrity," he sneered, ignoring the start of most of the lion's mane. "Mr. Addams, what would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood?" "So many thanks, Professor. Depending on the other ingredients and circumstances in which the potion is brewed, with Demiguy's hair you would achieve invisibility at the cost of your own soul. When stirred under the half-moon with a pinch of graveyard dirt, you'd get a potion that could turn anything inside out. With silver and a mermaid's heart, an offering that would raise the kraken from the depths of the sea." The green eyes looked up at his stoic expression before curving upwards happily. "But I suppose you're talking about the draught of living death, the most common application for those 2 ingredients." "Where would I find the bezoar?" He managed to not croak. His mind was in a whirl. That knowledge about the kraken had been banned from everything except the books of darkest art. "Stomachs of nearly any living thing in the world. My grandmother has one of the 14th century, taken from the stomach of a girl who couldn't stop eating her hair. It was such a pity when she didn't survive the operation." There were sounds of retching. "Monkshood and wolfsbane." "Aconite, also known as devil's helmet. I'm partial to Aconitum carmichaeli myself. Which species do you use, sir?" "Aconitum licoctonum," he said blankly, still stunned. He shook his head free with a growl and turned a ferocious glare onto the other students, who were all staring at them. "Well, what are you waiting for? Write this down." Half an hour into the class, Snape had completely forgotten about the perplexing Addams. He shouldn't have. "Idiot boy!" he hissed at Neville Longbottom, who was sporting a skin covered with pus-filled boils. "Porcupine quills after you take the potion off the fire. You are a catastrophe in the making, the worst thing to ever touch a cauldron." Harry smiled into his potion, the expression hidden by the thick steam. Puxley wasn't the only one who liked explosions. People were still talking about it. Harry tilted his umbrella forward to hide his smile. He wasn't as sensitive as his mother was to sunlight, but too much of it was just plain irritating. He had thought that the weather in this part of the world would be delightfully dreary and overcast all the time. How wrong he was! "Hold your hands out over the broomsticks and say 'up,'" a yellow-eyed woman said. Madame Hooch, he thought her name was. Her eyes were beautiful, like a deadly raptor before leaping on its prey. Up, he sat dutifully along with the rest of them. His broom stayed on the ground. He looked down at it and snapped his fingers. It leapt into his hand, faintly quivering. He sat primly on the handle, side saddle, as his grandmother had taught him. It was only proper. A whoosh made him look up. Neville Longbottom, the glorious potion disaster, was rising in the air, his face as pale as a new corpse. His fall was inevitable, accompanied by the hard crack of bone. A broken wrist. How fortunate! Everyone on the ground, Madame Hooch said, rolling her lovely eyes. If I catch anyone in the air, you'll be in detention faster than you can say Quidditch. Come along, Longbottom. It's the infirmary for you. Did you see his face, the great lump? Draco was a little bully. He could see a young Puxley in him. He was smiling. He was missing his family more and more every day. That's Neville's. Give it back. That was Ronald Bilious Weasley, with his family's red hair. It looked like spilled blood in the sun, and Harry felt another pang of homesickness. His hand itched for the ridged handle of the knives of his, or the sleek smoothness of his sandon. He hadn't held a weapon in so long, and it was driving him mad. He watched with interested eyes as the two brooms soared into the air. They zoomed backwards and forwards, taunting, flying faster than the brooms. Catch it if you can, then. Draco! Draco nearly felt his heart stop when he looked around into blithe green eyes. He hadn't even heard the effeminate boy rise up behind him. The remembrall fell from his nerveless fingers. Harry caught it without a thought, his skirt rippling in the wind like strands of darkness in the blue sky. He was still holding his umbrella in one hand, and how he stayed on the broom was an absolute mystery. Give it back, Addams, the redhead said, his usually boisterous voice subdued now. Everyone in school knew about Harvest. Certainly, Ronald. The sound of his name on those stained lips was like sensual satin over thorns. Weasley caught the remembrall and managed not to drop it. Harry looked at the blonde who was staring wide-eyed at him, and he couldn't resist. He leaned over and purred. Come now, Draco. You naughty thing. You don't want to be punished, do you? A bit late for that, though. Madame Hooch had given all three of them detention with Filch. Then she had gone and told Professor Snape that he was an exceptional flyer, worthy of the Seeker. How droll! Harry walked back to the dungeons alone. Apparently the eternal enmity of the Weasleys and Malfoys was reduced to nothing against the apprehension and Addams could induce. It was probably why he'd been punished for into his room. Harry looked around in the gloom. He could smell dog spit, and he could hear snarling. He took a candle from his pocket and caressed the wick. It flared. He laughed. The next day, Draco Malfoy was wallowing in guilt, certain he would be in Azkaban by nightfall. He didn't know what had come over him. He had just felt so ashamed that he'd been beaten and disgusted by the fact that he'd had to serve detention next to a Weasley of all people. And the Addams boy had just smiled and scrubbed and looked completely at ease among the grime and dust of dungeons. It was all just so damn annoying, and he had to do something about it. His godfather cared deeply for him, despite the fact that he was a completely sadistic professor and had wanted him to understand just why they weren't allowed there. Adams was probably long gone by now, ripped into 1,000 pieces by the three-headed dog that Snape had shown him during the first night. He had done it impulsively, in the heat of the moment, and now he was going to be in so much trouble. If only the dark-haired boy wasn't dead. If only he had gotten out before the dog had smelled him. Draco would never do anything impulsive again. A frigid fingertip slid over the nape of his neck, making him start. And his heart nearly stopped again when Harry sat next to him as cheerful as ever. Thank you for your present, Draco. How did you know I like dogs? Harry. Hey, Addams! Harry looked around questioningly. His fan flapped open, hiding his mouth from the approaching boy. He mentally flipped through all the names he had memorized. Yes, Terence? Terence Hicks looked down at the slim figure and paused. Even the older students were reluctant at the thought of talking to an Addams, and yet here he was, in front of the creepiest person that had ever walked the halls of Hogwarts, about to say something that might just piss him off. I heard that Professor Snape was thinking of making you the Seeker for Slytherin team. Yes? God, this was hard. I don't know if you know, but you're our current Seeker, isn't that right? Harry nearly laughed, but stopped himself. The boy looked like a mass of nerves already. Don't worry, Terence. I won't be on the team this year. What? Terence blinked in surprise. It was like he was a mind reader or something. But Madame Hooch said you were good at flying. You were a natural, she said. So? Don't worry, Harry repeated, emerald gaze gleaming in the sunset. There are other ways of flying. Okay then, thanks. Harry watched benevolently as the student left. Then he licked his lips free of blood, folded his fan, and continued to the great hall. Blood dripped down from the severed head, oozing thickly between his fingers before splashing into the cauldron. The dark liquid already there moved in unnatural ways, bubbling like hot tar even though there was no fire under it. It smelled like floor polish, coffee, and fresh vomit. He tipped in a little spider woman and stirred the whole thing with a dead lizard's claw. He had killed it 2 hours before, but that was probably all right. A ghastly face appeared on the surface of the potion, the stuffs of nightmares, looking like it had been dredged from the depths of hell. Grandma, how lovely to see you. Martisha! Gomez! It's Harry! More faces appeared, and he smiled down at them. Happy Halloween. I've missed you all. Unhappy, darling? Deathly so, Mother. I'm so proud. How are your grades, eh? His father said jovially. Worse than Armageddon, I hope. I'm at the top of my class in potions and transfiguration and defense. That's my boy, Granny Thrum cackled. I've got your present, Harry. Wednesday's face glowed like a werewolf's moon as she raised the caged tarantula for him to see. I love it! The potion flickered and Pugsley's face appeared, tinged corpse grey by the use of another potion. He was in Salem now, but he looked no worse for the wear. Hey, Harry! Hey, y'all! Pugsley, I heard you blew up your fencing teacher. His older brother scratched the back of his head in embarrassment. It was nothing. My son, the fusilade murderer. I love it. And you, my viper, killed anyone lately? I haven't had the chance, father. He looked trite. I haven't even had the chance for sandbomb practice. I'm getting rusty. Does that mean I get to cut off your head when you come back? Wednesday perked up. I've redesigned the guillotine. Well, you may try. Harvest raised his head suddenly, his nostrils twitching at the overpowering smell of bad eggs that had made its way into the room. The soles of his bare feet could feel the reverberations in the stone, and excitement suddenly welled up in him. There was only one thing that could smell like that. I'm afraid I must cut this short. There seems to be a troll in the castle. Trolls? They're much more advanced than I thought. That's so unfair, Puxley muttered. We don't have trolls in Salem. Have fun, my viper. Morticia smiled proudly at him from the depths of the cauldron. Remember to aim for the takonka. Tish, that's troll language. Harry ran through the dark halls, his heart drumming in his ears. A troll? He never killed a troll before. He ducked behind statues to avoid the stampeding students and prefects, weaving in and out of the shadows, leaving the torchlight flickering in his wake. His blood, sluggish from the long period of inactivity, was suddenly coursing through his veins like fire. He could taste it in his mouth, and it inflamed him even more. Finally, it had been so long. His eyes gleamed with an unearthly hue as he hid in the nearest doorway, his face still bare so he could feel how far his prey was. His hair was pinned up, but the fringe hung low over his eyes, shadowing his face. Addams? Addams? He wisely kept the senbon hidden in his hand as he whirled around. The girl shrank back, her tear-stained face now cast with terror. Hermione, what are you doing here? I... Shh. He slid next to her and she fainted dead away. He rolled his eyes. Honestly. The troll burst in, knocking the door off its hinges, and he forgot about her. He could feel the urge to laugh clawing against his chest, and his mind was suddenly filled with dark, gleeful promises. It was an addictive, familiar chant pushing him closer and closer into the abyss from whence the first atoms had emerged. He'd heard it in his soul when he had first felt blood spill on his skin, and every dark night since, in the silence of his dreams, in his mother's voice, in his father's laugh. The troll's movements were ponderous, like every step, every swing was fighting against gravity. The senbon barely scratched its cement-like skin, and he swallowed the crow of delight at the delicious challenge that was before him. This was what he was made for, what he was, what all his family was, and it was the dark of the moon. Things couldn't get better. Blaise looked at Harvest from the corner of his eyes. They were well into the second semester, and he still hadn't revised his opinion of the brunette. Harveste Addams was still creepy. Even Professor Snape was scared of him. Ever since that first day in potions, the teacher had barely said 2 words to his most enigmatic student, no matter how many explosions he caused, and he caused a lot. And the quaffle is taken immediately by Angelina Johnson of Gryffindor. The whole school had learned about how Harvest had dealt with the rampaging troll that somehow found its way into Hogwarts. When the teachers had arrived, there had been nothing but chunks left, strewn all over the girls' bathroom, its stone grey blood splashed on even on the ceiling. Harvest had been spotlessly, unnaturally clean, sitting quietly in one corner and coaxing Hermione Granger into drinking a bit of water. Or, well, at least they hoped it was water. Back to Johnson, Anne! No, the Slytherins have taken the quaffle! Surely it had been water. He's going to... No, stop by an excellent move! The Granger girl had apparently been alienated by the Gryffindors, and now she sat meekly next to the enigmatic Slytherin that everyone else was scared of, one hand on his cloaked arm as she looked up at the Quidditch players. Perhaps he brainwashed her. Ouch, that must have hurt! Hit on the back of the head by a bludger! The lucky darling, Adams said, his smooth, pleasant tone. That must be exquisitely painful. You really are a sadist, Harry. Harry? She could call him Harry without dying. No signs of the snitch yet. No signs of the snitch yet? Draco asked, scooting closer to Blaise. His eyes were on Harvest, too, as if by examining the brunette minutely, he could solve the whole mystery that was the young Addams. I suppose not. A breeze picked up, and Draco suddenly wished he hadn't been looking at Harveste Addams. He wished he had been born blind. On the smooth, pale forehead, always hidden behind the long, dark fringe, there was a scar shaped like a lightning bolt. He looked at Blaise, and he knew that his friend had seen it too. They were going to be in so much trouble. You are Harry Potter! Albus Dumbledore said disbelievingly. Harry James Potter? The only other person in the room chuckled darkly. In another life, Headmaster. My name is Harveste Addams now. My dear boy, this is astounding. We thought you were dead. Why ever would you think that? We found the Dursleys' bodies in the River Thames. They were brutally butchered. The pale, cold smile barely flickered. Indeed? How fascinating. How did you even end up in America with the Addams? Why can't I find any record of you? Harry laughed behind his fan. As much as I would like to see a heart attack. Headmaster, I must ask you to desist. I cannot answer your questions. You would have to ask my mother. But there is no trace, not a single thread that links you to Harry Potter. You were born Harveste Addams. Yes, I was. I am an Addams through and through. That was that. Even Albus Dumbledore couldn't get an answer, quailed under that smile, and had to let go. He was standing in a pool of blood that reached his thighs, a knife's edge gleaming under the full moon's light. His sister stood beside him, the proverbial Valkyrie, her hair flying through, though there was no wind, and a stained axe hefted onto her shoulder. His brother was on his other side, a smear of dark red on his cheek, teeth bared in a wicked smile. Pubert was on a rock, toothlessly gnawing on a fiery arrow. His dear mother and father and uncle were flying in a sky the color of a bruise, hunting, killing. The house on 1001 Cemetery Road rose forbiddingly behind them, wreathed in thunderstorms and lit by demonic lightning. There was so much blood. Harry liked this mirror. He smiled. A crack appeared in the ornate frame. Detention again. Father would have been kicked out by now, but neither he nor Pugsley had their father's raw talent for mayhem. They could only hope that Wednesday and Pubert had inherited the gene. Hermione and he had bumped into the Weasley brothers as they emerged from the astronomy tower. Harry had smelled the distinctive tang of dragon fire and hadn't cared, but McGonagall's eyes were sharper than any cat's, and since they had been out after curfew, were sentenced to detention. Now they were in the Forbidden Forest, a half-giant tromping on the leaf-laden ground before them. Somebody had been killing unicorns, apparently. What a novel idea. I want Fang, Ron said quickly. I warn you, he's a coward. Hagrid said. Adams, Granger, you go with him. The twins and I will go this way. If there's any trouble, send up Sparks. Harry, Hermione whispered once they were encased in the darkness of the forest. She was a sweet girl, not a patch on Wednesday, but she had stuck around after the troll. It was nice having someone to talk to about classes, if not maiming techniques, and she had been quite interested in the history of weapons. I've never seen your wand, you know. Do you have one? Certainly, darling. You don't use it. You don't use it in class, Ronald said, listening in. They were whispering now. The weight of the Forbidden Forest's secret hung heavily between every branch. I don't have to. Adams have a talent for wandless magic. It's in the blood. He smiled to himself at a little inside joke. Can I see it? He pulled it out of the sleeve of his coat wordlessly, his eyes on the silvery blood that glimmered enticingly on the ground every few feet. It was hauntingly beautiful. He was sure Wednesday would love it. Then he remembered something. Don't touch the tip. The girl paused at her from her intense scrutiny. Why not? It's poisoned. Weasley would have said something if the bushes hadn't rustled then. His mouth closed with a snap. Harry stepped forward, interested. Harry! There was a cloaked figure on the ground, kneeling next to the dead unicorn. It was hooded, cloaked to its very fingertips, and bent over the neck of the animal. It looked like it was drinking its blood, or was anyway. At the sound of Hermione's voice, it looked up. There was nothing to see in the folds of the cowl, other than the shadows upon shadows. It was an interesting trick that he would have to learn sometime. The creature stood up fluidly and began to slither towards them. Sangbon peppered the ground before it, and Harry's razor-edged fan scythed at where its neck should have been. It darted backwards, faster than even his father. Shoo! It disappeared, flitting away like a ghost. Harry! What? I don't know. Harry purred at the challenge in the air. Hermione, take Fang and find Hagrid. Ronald, go with her. I'll wait here. Oh, are you sure? Sweet girl, he could taste her fear, and still she was protective. Yes, go on. He waited until they had gone, then approached the tragically magnificent dead form. It glowed even more than its blood did, a stark shining star against the overall midnight that surrounded it. He reached out to caress the blood-soaked flank. I would not do that, Harry Potter. The centaur caught the fan inches away from its bare torso. It saw the look in his eyes. Harveste Addams, it amended. Thank you, centaur. Harry sat back on his heels, his palms on the gleaming horn. It was delightfully sharp, enough to cut into his skin. It is true, the stories about you, the stars do not lie. They rarely do. The wound, a simple gash over his fingertips, wasn't too deep. It would heal in time. He licked up the last trickle, relishing in the full, metallic taste, and reached out again. Do not, Harveste Addams. Those who taste the blood of a unicorn are doomed to a half-life. The man you saw is cursed forever, never to truly be part of the world. Really? The silvery blood was beautiful. It glimmered over his skin like diamonds on a lake. He would have to take some home. Why should he have all the fun then? It was you in the forest that night, Harry said. It wasn't a question. Professor Quirrell glared haughtily at him. His trademark stutter gone without a trace. Yes.
Yes.
They were probably miles under the school. Quirrell had invited him into his office to discuss his exam, and he had followed. One step through a doorway, and he was once more face to face with the three-headed dog. It had shied away from him. Then there had been an obstacle, all of them trivial, almost playful. The last one was fun, though. They hadn't had a Cremantala blood in a while. Quirrell had screamed at him for taking the wrong bottle, but it had tasted quite nice actually, with a hint of peppermint. Snape really was a genius. He had followed because it was interesting. He hadn't cut off the turbaned hat because the puzzles were entertaining, but really, everything had its limits. What do you want with me? You are Harry Potter. Harry Potter. The mysterious voice wound through the air. It was impressive the way it could actually hiss a name that didn't have anything to hiss. You people are have an unhealthy fascination with that name. I haven't been Harry in 6 years, and I'll thank you to call me by my real name. Quirrell blinked, obviously wondering why he wasn't quivering mass of a frightened little boy. Harry rolled his eyes. Listen, Professor, tell me what you want so you can be done with it. The moon is dark tonight, and I haven't even begun to clean my tools. Look at the mirror and tell me what you see. Harry turned obediently, his mind already on the sacrifice he would be offering tonight. He hoped to find something a little bigger than lizards, but the denizens of forbidden forests were growing quite scarce. He wondered whether the centaur had anything to do with it. Tell me what you see, Addams. Blood, he said noncommittally. I always see blood. Oh, and a cup of tea. I haven't had tea in a long time. What? But the stone! Where is the stone? What are you talking about? Silly man, Harry thought, starting to scowl at for the first time in a year. Let me speak to him. Master, you don't have the strength. I have strength enough for this. Harry's lips pursed. Does he have a snake under that turban? It wasn't a snake. It was worse, a noseless face stuck to the back of Quirrell's hairless head, its florid bloodshot eyes gleaming out of a horrifically ashen complexion. You don't use baking powder, do you? My mother swears by it. What? Do not play games with me, boy. I am Lord Voldemort. Oh, Harry blinked. He'd seen scarier things in his bedroom closet. But then again, it's a whole other kettle of wriggly things. Yes! The head said, mistaking his silence for fear. The line of Addams had truly been gone too long. Now tell me, where is the stone? I am growing exceedingly tired of this game. What damn stone? The Sorcerers stone, Potter. The magic that will bring me back to life. He had sharpened his wand. It slid through flesh like a hot knife through butter. Then the poison started to work. Quirrell hadn't even had time to gasp. The shocked ruby eyes were wide, and this cloak, its dark irises were flecked with gold. Harry smiled into them, the barest hint of a fang among the pearly whites. I did warn you. And now it was the last day of school. Slytherins had won the House Cup, through no fault of his own, and now his housemates were celebrating. They had better sense to disturb him, though, and around his chosen couch there was a little bubble of respectful silence. He had invited Hermione, too. Benjamin Urquhart had tried to explain that Slytherins did not invite Gryffindors into their room, but a smile had him stuttering to a halt. Now his frizzy-haired friend sat next to him, a sunbonne shining in her fingers. I can keep it? Are you serious? Of course, I have more. He slanted his smile at her. Perhaps next year I can teach you how to use it, I would like that. She looked up at him shyly. I've never had a friend like you before. I'll miss you over the summer. Really? Really? Harry turned his head to the echo, catching both Draco and Blaze in his sights. He chuckled. Is the fact that I might have made a friend so inconceivable to you? We'll miss you too, is all, Blaze said hurriedly, elbowing his blonde friend in the gut. Isn't that right, Draco? Draco's face took on the look of someone who'd just swallowed a pickled frog. Ah, is that so? Harry said teasingly, fighting to urge to laugh yet again. Then the three of you wouldn't mind visiting me over the summer. What? What? I'd love to, Harry. Well, wasn't this a chapter to go by? I have to say, I didn't realize it was the whole Sorcerer's Stone in one go. But let's hope there's going to be more. See ya next time. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you liked it to get more content of this variation.